Good morning, DEC members and guests. I'm Steve Grigorian, CEO of the Detroit Economic Club, coming to you from lovely downtown Detroit. A couple of quick announcements before we get started. I always want to take a brief moment to thank the terrific DEC sponsors for their continued support of our mission, and you're seeing them on your screen. And I want to thank you for continuing to support the DEC with your membership. You are important to us. On a programming note, for the next few weeks, we've got a ton of virtual meetings, and they're everyone's favorite price, free. Next Wednesday, you'll want to be with us on Zoom as we talk to Alec Ross, author of The Raging 2020s. Plenty on the calendar. Be sure to check them out on our website. There's something for everyone, and we're always adding more, of course. You already know how important it is to the DEC that high school and college students are included in everything we do, and today is no exception. We want to welcome students from Cody High School, Riverview High School, and Schoolcraft College, and we're really happy that you've joined us today. The DEC, as you know, has an incredible history of speakers, and our speaker today joins a distinguished list of 12 others who, in our 88-year history, have addressed the DEC on this day, February 10th. And that eclectic list begins with a speaker way back in 1936 named Percival Whaley. I could not find anything on him when I Googled, maybe you can, but it also includes in 1941, Major General Paul Malone from the War Department, who delivered a speech titled Defend America. 1964, we hosted the Pennsylvania Governor William Scranton. 1986, UAW President Owen Beaver, and it's also included CEOs from Time Warner and Northrop Grumman. And today we're pleased to add Matthew Barzun as our 13th speaker on this day in DEC history. Matthew served as U.S. ambassador to the UK and Sweden during the Obama administration. In Obama's second campaign, Matthew served as national finance chair, a big job. And he was an entrepreneur in the early 90s when he helped start CNET Networks. Today, he's the publisher of Louisville Magazine and Louisville.com. And of course, the author of The Power of Giving Away Power, which is our focus today. So we're so pleased that Matthew would carve out some time for us today from Louisville. Let's say hello and welcome Matthew to the Detroit Economic Club.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, the team that helped Steve make us all good on Zoom. And I wish I could be there in person with all of you, but you all aren't in person. But anyway, I'm honored to be part of that illustrious speakers list you read. And I'm going to track down this Percival guy. I got to find out who Percival Whaley is. Yeah.
Let me know what you find out. All right. So Matthew, I want to start with some context. Your book, Power of Giving Away Power, How the Best Leaders Learn to Let Go. And in it, you address this idea. Many leaders believe if you let go of hierarchy, chaos will reign. But when leaders find the courage to distribute power rather than to hoard it, something amazing happens. And you captured my attention with two provocative statements in your introduction. One, and I'm going to get your reaction here. One, we pretend we know how to lead, pretend we know how to position our companies for an uncertain future. And we hold on tightly to the theater of pretend and predict. And two, we think we must hoard power before someone else takes it. So let's start with those two ideas and get your overall thoughts.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the first three words of the book, and I wrote the introduction last because I reached out, including your next speaker, Alec Ross is a good friend of mine who you're going to hear from next week. And his new book is great. His first book, The Future of Industries, I encourage you to also read. It's wonderful. So I reached out to Alec. I reached out to these friends who'd written books before. I'd never done it. And to a person, they said, oh, I was struggling with the introduction. And they said, oh, you never write that first. That comes last. Oh, okay. But the first three words of it are pretending is exhausting. And I think a lot of us as leaders in whatever realm are encouraged to pretend all the time. And so I wondered, well, why is that? And I think there's something that we dislike more than the exhaustion of pretending, and it is our fear of uncertainty. And we are encouraged to pretend all the time that we know what the right answer is. There is a wonderful man who I bet spoke to the Detroit Economic Club, Peter Drucker, probably the most quoted leadership guru of the last century, right? And actually got famous by studying General Motors. And the book he wrote coming out of his study of GM was Management by Objective, which was like the trendy thing in the 1950s. And people ran wild with it. And then he said, time out, people. He said, it is really helpful in the times where you know what your objective is. And he said, but what I've learned from corporate America, leaders know their objective at most 10% of the time. 10%. So 90% of the time, we don't know. And so what I try to advocate in the book, inspired by all these other leaders who don't pretend, they embrace the uncertainty and they make the uncertainty central to the products or the companies or the organizations or movements they're trying to build.
A big focus of the book, of course, is pyramid mindset versus constellation mindset. So for context, define the different mindsets for us, please. And then talk about why that pyramid mindset will not leave so politely.
Aristotle once said that the soul never thinks without an image. I wish I'd known that before I wrote the book. I would have put it right at the beginning of the book. The soul never thinks without an image. And so I'm going to suggest quickly here, I know it's oversimplified, but 2 images for 2 different ways we can look at ourselves and those around us as leaders. They both happen to be taken from the seal of the United States, kind of our national logo. And as a result, they both are on the back of a US $1 bill. So if you have a US dollar bill, and the first is the pyramid. I think we're all familiar with this. It is the image I use to describe the world of hierarchy, the world of top down, the world of in, out, up, down, win, lose. Everyone on this call is familiar with it, and I would bet pretty good at it. And by the way, it's not only the world of top down, it's the world of bottom up. And we can get to that maybe later. That's the same exact shape, just in reverse order. And hierarchy has its place. Interestingly, though, the people who designed the logo, the founders, back in 1776, it took longer to design that logo than it did to win the war. We can get to that if it's of interest. But they put the pyramid on the back as a symbol of, and the pyramid, I think, does have a place. Hierarchy certainly has a place. And it provides stability and it provides order. But what I try to argue in the book is it's not the only kind of stability and it's not the only kind of order. And that introduces us to our second image, which is also on the front of, or on the back of the dollar bill. It's the front of our logo. It's above the eagle's head. It's actually, if you have a US passport, it's much more prominent. It's hard to see on a dollar bill. But if you picture the eagle clutching the talons, right? I mean, clutching the arrows in its talons and then the olive branches. Above the eagle's head is our national motto, which we can't quiz the group here, but I bet everyone would know that it is e pluribus unum, from many one. Then they picked an image that was supposed to show us how you could be at once one and many. And they chose this thing they called the radiant constellation. And it's 13, we changed it on the dollar bill. It now looks very symmetrical, but originally it was 13 asymmetrical stars with beams of light radiating from the back. And it was supposed to be our visual guide for how you could be many and one. You could stand out as an individual star, stand out as an individual, and yet be part of something much bigger than yourself, namely a constellation. So those are the 2 images I use throughout the book. And they put the constellation on the front of our logo. I think we ought to put, as leaders, that constellation mindset, which allows you to stand out and fit in, at the front of our lives. And too often, to your point, we get in this pyramid mode. They could have said from many bricks, one pyramid, but they didn't. And from many bricks, one pyramid leads you, you either fit in or you are left out. And too often we do that as leaders. And that feeling of being left out has real harm to our economy, to our country, to our civics, our politics, et cetera.
You said in there that it won't leave politely. Why is that? The pyramid mindset.
Well, so every organization, I mean, big corporate America is an obvious one, but nonprofits, academia, you name it, that hierarchical mentality exists in all of these. And it isn't just sort of out there that you point your finger. It starts to do things to us inside. Winston Churchill had that great quote about architecture. And he said, we start off by designing buildings. Thereafter, they design us. I mean, they control how we do. And the same is true of organizations, that hierarchical stuff. And here's what I mean in a nutshell. We get really good at knowing the basics of a hierarchy are who's in charge, what's the point, where do I fit in? So we're always asking ourselves in a hierarchy of any size, who's in charge, what's the point, where do I fit in? So we get really good at knowing who's up and who's down. We get really good at that kind of order, and we get really good at chopping things up into their component parts, right? And that's all fine, and there's a place for that. But what happens over the years is we start to lose other things as we get good at that, and we start to lose awareness of other kinds of order. We start to lose appreciation and facility for things that cannot be chopped up into their parts and understood in isolation. You think about something like customer satisfaction, competitive landscape, all these things can't be understood in isolation. They only exist in relation with other things, and we get less good at that. And so what I've discovered is there's so much comfort, even if we don't love it, there's so much comfort in the pyramid, the world of up and down and win and lose, that we think that if you leave that pyramid structure, that you're signing up for chaos or communism, right? And I'm like, no. I mean, I'm not for anarchy or for communism. There's another way of organizing ourselves. Again, this constellation.
All right, take a speed walk with us through American history. You do it really well in the book. Tell us how we were once constellation thinkers, but that's changed.
Well, yes. Okay. So back to the designing of this logo that took so long to do, and this wonderful man who I met on Wikipedia in discovering what is that funny shape above the eagle's head, and I did this whole dive into that history and why it took longer to design this logo than to win the war, and that this image was, I think it expresses the best idea America has ever had. Now, we fell tragically and hypocritically short of it back in the 1780s. We fall short of it today. But it is the symbol for interdependence. And it represented not only individuals, it represented how could these 13 states, which were so proudly independent, actually work together to make something bigger than they could on their own. And so we celebrate Independence Day, right? I get it. I have fun on July 4th. That wasn't the hard part, right? Any band of revolutionaries can declare independence. And in fact, Google it. I mean, they do it all the time, every year. But the triumph in Philadelphia wasn't independence. It was just try to stitch together in the form of a constitution and other things, interdependence. And so think about it. I live in Kentucky. Kentucky does not report to the federal government in Washington, D.C. It is not a hierarchy. It is a weird and sort of wonderful and imperfect constellation. Louisville, Kentucky, where I live, doesn't report to Frankfurt, the capital, right? So we're actually used to this, and it was set up as a constellation. And so we are, think about the family unit, right? We're actually more used to constellation with distinct individuals voluntarily connecting with one another in varied ways than we are to this very rigid hierarchical structure. It crowds out lots of initiative and energy.
All right, let's remind folks that the final few minutes, we want to hear from you. So use the chat box to throw a question in, and we'll get to those. And also, in the chat box, you're going to find the link to the book. So I encourage you. It's a really good read. I read it cover to cover and took a lot of notes and learned a lot from it. So you mentioned, Matthew, already, Peter Drucker. So he revealed his guru. Tell us who that is. And
this is really cool. So Peter Drucker, we talked about. Harvard Business Review, let's say 20 years ago, they canvassed 200 business gurus around the world, from academia, big business, nonprofits, think tanks. And they said, who's your guru? Number one, Peter Drucker. Right, so the guru's guru is Peter Drucker. And then he reveals towards the end of his career that he had a guru all along. She never showed up on any of those gurus lists, and yet she's the guru's guru. And he said, every good management and leadership idea we've had comes from her. And he said she has been erased from history, even though she was the brightest star in the leadership firmament, is how he put it.
I'd never heard of her. And
no one's ever heard of her.
I read your book.
So her name is Mary Parker Follett, and she died the year the Economic Club was born in Detroit. Dies 1934, born 1868 outside of Massachusetts. I'm sorry, outside of Boston, near where I grew up. And she is this remarkable woman, and with a lot to teach us today. She wrote 3 books, but the most important one she wrote about 100 years ago, when America was coming out of, and the world was coming out of, a global pandemic. Everywhere she looked, she saw racial, social, and economic division. Everywhere she looked, she saw raging debates about the fear of big business, equally raging debates about the fear of what government might do in the name of regulating big business. Sound familiar? Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah. And so she said, look, this can all seem really daunting, but what I love about her is that she had these very practical and tactical things that each of us as citizens and leaders can do about it. And she gets really practical and tactical. And she says, look, beginning at your next Monday morning meeting, so to speak, you can start making a difference. And I'm going to really summarize quickly what is worth reading at greater length, how she says it. But she says, look, there are 4 possible outcomes of a meeting, but only one of them is worthwhile. Bad outcome number 1, you try to win the meeting. She said, why are you doing it? Why did you invite anyone else if you have all the great ideas pre-cooked up in your brain? Bad outcome number 2, you acquiesce, right? You just say, oh, well, Steve or Megan, they seem fired up, just let them win their way. No. She said, you're denying the group a unique perspective, namely your own. Bad outcome number 3. Now, this is hard for us because we were all taught, certainly I was taught to achieve what she doesn't like, which is compromise. She said, I know it sounds better than winning and acquiescing, but really it's just a series of mini victories and mini acquiescences. You don't leave that meeting with anything. At best, you leave with a subset of what you came in with. So the only reason she thinks we should gather around a table, virtual like this or in person, is to make something, to co-create something. And it doesn't have to be a product. I mean, it could be make a determination, make a product roadmap. You know, if you have a bunch of people making something together, there's this magic, and it may seem mundane, but it's kind of there's magic in the mundaneness of, if you make something with another group of people, you are forever part of that thing. It is forever part of you, and you aren't diminished by it. You're enhanced by it. And it is so different from the mindset of trying to win or lose a meet, you know. And so as I reflect on this today in 2022, and I write a little cheat sheet for myself in every meeting, three expectations we could bring to every gathering. Expect to be needed, right? Bring your truth, no one else can. Number 2, expect to need others. That's why you're in a meeting. And the third and most important one, expect to be changed. And that third one is really the reciprocal obligation. I think it's really important where we are now in our country and in our cities, which you expect to be changed in the sense that if you have made something as a group, you're going to leave that meeting just a little bit of a different person than you entered it. And if you don't, then you start bringing that same stale self to your next meeting. And then we start to get calcified, and we stop growing, and we stop learning. So expect to be needed, expect to need others, expect to be changed.
Really important point. Thank you. Really provocative too, if you think about that. So, all right, I want to talk about 2 books. It's a business audience, and I'm guessing that most people have read these books. We'll take them one at a time. First one, Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective. He promotes 2 sets of habits. The first is about wins, victory, which we just talked about. not a good meeting outcome. The second set is the habit of interdependence. Well, those two habits clash, right, in this debate of pyramid versus constellation. So talk about that.
Sure. I love the book, and I'm sure many here, I'm not alone. I mean, it is the top-selling business self-help, whatever you want to categorize it, of all time. And we'll talk about who comes in second, because that's interesting too. But so I love the book. I've read it many times. I learned a lot from it. Millions have. So yes, there are 7 habits, but there's really 2 points he's trying to make. Point number 1 is move from a world of dependence to a world of independence. The second set of habits are, let's move from independence to interdependence. And so at the 15-year mark, this thing has sold like a gajillion copies, and he releases a new, and he writes a foreword in it. And he says, I'm really surprised. People, Americans, or the world, seems to love my first set of habits, becoming independent. But boy, have we not embraced the most important part, which is becoming interdependent. Mm-hmm. And he said, I probably should have said that moving to interdependence and the habits of interdependence are 10 times more important and 10 times harder. So then he goes on and he writes another book. Now, this didn't sell very well, or nearly as well as the first one, called The Eighth Habit. And I'm curious, we can't do a show of hands, but I'm curious how many people have read The Eighth Habit. My guess is not as many. And he wrote this book, and it was only to make the point that interdependence is a higher virtue than independence. But we get so stuck in this. And one way, and try this next time you're with people, sure. And it works on Zoom, it works live. And I've done it a lot over the last 5 years as I was writing this book. Let's say, to keep the math simple, 10 people, and you say, what's the opposite of winning? And everyone will say in unison, losing. And you say, yeah. Then you say, well, what's the opposite of winning and losing? And then there's a pause. And 9 out of 10 of us say something like this. I don't know, not playing. 1 out of 10 of us says playing, or laughing, or learning, or all the other things we do in our life that don't lend themselves to winning or losing. And something funny happens when the 9 of us hear that other person. We kind of smile and we're like, oh, yeah, of course, right. But this is why Covey, I think he was right on that interdependence is more important. But the first habit of interdependence is win-win. And this is, I think, win-win is a losing formula. And I know that's provocative, but it's, once you invoke winning, you get losing as a package deal. And another little exercise, if you ask a group of people, hey, quick show of hands, how many people here like to lose an argument? Nobody raises their hand. So why do we trick ourselves, and why do we train? I know we have some high schoolers and college students on the call. We train our young, and we were all trained, those of us who are old people, to win arguments all the time. And look, I know they have a place in our legal system and they're an important part. They are not the only thing. And we spend so much time trying to win, and no one likes to lose an argument. It's really bad math. So that's why I think we've had such a hard time developing the habits of interdependence, or constellation habits, as I call them. And yet there are these leaders out there who've built some of the most consequential organizations the world has ever seen. And we'll talk about those later, who show us. People like Mary Follett, who you haven't heard of, but others you really have, who can show us the habits of interdependence.
Great. Second book, Jim Collins, Good to Great. I think most people have read that. So,
and it's probably, Good to Great. I think the number 2 best-selling business book of all time. Yeah. Probably the book I have given away to the most people. Really made an impact on me. And I went back with a new perspective, with a constellation mindset. I went back and reread it. And it's really telling. The book actually came from an essay that Collins wrote for Harvard Business Review. And it was one of the many memorable things in the book is what he calls level 5 leaders. These leaders and he calls them level 5. And in the book, he makes a pyramid out of them, right? Level 1 at the bottom, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5 at the top. And what I thought was so funny, he interviewed all these leaders. And again, these are the leaders who transcended, who were what set them apart. They were great leaders, not good leaders. And to a person, they said, I don't want to be put on a pedestal, right? And what does he do? But he puts them on the top of a pedestal at the top of a pyramid.
Level 5, correct.
Level 5. And so that is our default setting. We just love ordering things in that way. And he says, Collins in the book admits, he's like, look, it's not like you do level 1 first, then level 2, level 3. It doesn't work that way. And yet that's our default way of visualizing it. And I think it's misleading. It's not helpful. And he describes the essence of these leaders. He said they have unbelievable, and he was surprised by it because he really didn't like in the 1990s, that cult of the CEO, Chainsaw Al Dunlap. I hope I'm not offending anyone here, on the cover, like these hero CEOs, usually men. He didn't like that. And I think it was great. He's like, I don't want that. But there's something going on in these leaders. And he was so surprised that they could be at once humble and driven. And I think that says something. I'm so surprised that he's surprised, because the leaders I've been most inspired by are exactly that. They're humble in their personal demeanor, but they're driven in the pursuit of something other than themselves. And again, if you overlay the constellation, they are stars, they are amazing people, but they are passionate about not themselves as an isolated star, but about the constellation they're part of. And those aren't incongruous if you look at it that way.
Let's get into some business examples, and you lay a lot of them out in the book, which are really interesting, but they're constellation makers. And I want to start with Harvard Business School case 396-051. It's a classic in the category of tech disruption. Tell us.
Yeah, so this is a quiz that we'll just, that most people, including myself, would have gotten wrong. You say, okay, so Harvard Business, they write the case study about the company that went digital and beat one of the oldest companies in the world, which is Encyclopedia Britannica. And so if you ask a group of people, almost all of us will guess Wikipedia, which is not the right answer. I mean, it's right in the sense that it is now, but they wrote the business case about Microsoft Encarta, which I'm confident the high school students here on the call have never heard of. And all of us our age are like, oh yeah, right. And I think it's telling that Microsoft, which at the time I think was the richest company in the world by market cap, set out to go get into the very lucrative world back then of encyclopedias. And they could figure out, and they were taking on an Encyclopedia Britannica model, which was a very pyramid kind of business model. And they knew the power of digital compression, the power of hyperlinking. They had figured that all out. And they had it on a CD-ROM and they did it everything. And for like a few years, they won. But then along comes Jimmy Wales, a commodity trader, right, from Alabama, living in Chicago, I think at the time, right? And he develops what we now all use. And we you were joking about Percival Whaley, and you said, I Googled them, right? And we all say we Google things, but really, if we're trying to figure out who someone is, usually the first thing that pops up that'll settle the argument at the Thanksgiving dinner table isn't some random blog, right? It's Wikipedia, right? That like will show who Percival, whoever his name is. And you're like, oh, okay, good enough. So Jimmy has a business model. Imagine being part of the pitch. You're up against the richest company in the world, Microsoft, and the oldest, Britannica. And he's like, I'm going to come up with a system that doesn't pay anyone to contribute to it, and I don't charge anyone to use it. Who's with me, right? People thought it was crazy. But we don't have time to get fully into it today, but his first product wasn't Wikipedia. His first product was called Newpedia, and it was a giant failure. Same business model with one really important distinction. He thought you could get really smart people out there to write full articles for you, and he had an 8-step review process because he was paranoid there'd be plagiarists, and he was the new kid on the block. So after 1 year of this rigid protocol, he had 18 articles live on Newpedia. You don't have to be, he was really good at math. You don't have to be good at math to be like, you're never going to catch up with the big two at 18 articles a year. So a person on his team says, what if we try a new approach? He's like, what do you mean? He's like, well, what if we just lighten up? What if we let go? What if we give power away to other people and let Steve write a paragraph, Megan come in and write a sentence, Mary amend it. They don't have to know each other, and we'll have a collaboratively written, very rigorous, but collaboratively produced. And he's like, I don't know if that'll work, but they tried it. They took this leap. They had 18,000 articles at the end of the first year, and the rest is history, right? And by the way, there are plenty of mistakes we've all found in Wikipedia. There were plenty of mistakes in Encarta and in Britannica too, but Britannica wasn't going to republish a whole bookshelf just because they found a mistake. So Wikipedia is the largest human knowledge transfer engine the world has ever seen. It is absolutely amazing, and it is a constellation in action. And it all began by Jimmy taking this leap and his team, which is scary, of giving away power to other people, which then they got it back and back again.
Great story. I want to talk about your time as U.S. ambassador to UK. And in the book, you spent a great deal of time talking about Winston Churchill and how he creates a special relationship with the U.S. during World War II. So now let's fast forward. It's 2013. You're the ambassador. You're 2 weeks into your role. So it's August 2013. British Parliament takes a vote on whether they should authorize the use of force to help the U.S. in a potential conflict in Syria. And the vote does not pass. And here's the headline of the British newspaper Sun, and it reads, "Death Notice," referring to that special relationship. You did something unique to address it. What did you do?
Well, that headline, which was sort of clever and I think not true, which is the implication is if you are disagreeing, then your relationship is dead. And as someone who is in a marriage or any partnership, it's like, of course, disagreement doesn't equal death. Disagreement, if properly thought of, is actually where all the energy lives. This is another one of the great lessons Mary Follett reminds us of. So I decided, okay, at the same time that article hit, the wonderful people at Pew Research published this global study of how young people, which is a phrase that only old people use, how young people perceive America. And it was all of Europe plus Japan, New Zealand, Australia, Brazil, South Africa, Nigeria, 40 countries. And in every single country but one, young people who I think were under 25 had a higher opinion of America than their parents and grandparents. And the one country that didn't was the United Kingdom. So I thought, okay, here I am. What are we going to do about it? And I knew I didn't want to do one thing, which was show up and give a lecture about US foreign policy to young people, because I had 3 teenagers in the house and I knew enough. I didn't want to give that lecture. I don't think they wanted to be lectured to. So we did something different. My wife is a therapist and got her degree in art therapy. And I basically wanted to do art therapy. I didn't call it that because I think that would have been kind of creepy and off-putting. But we do these workshops at high schools with high school seniors, 100 students at a time. And we'd give them like a blank A5 index card.
Yep.
And a pencil, but we had a cool pencil, not a yellow Ticonderoga. We had an embassy pencil. And I would say, please draw me a picture of something that frustrates, confuses, or concerns you about the United States. And then they'd start doodling. And then I'd usually get a panic look, usually from a young man, being like, I'm a terrible artist. And I was like, it doesn't have to be good, but if you'd rather write a word, you can just write a word. So they would do this. And then I would ask them what they wrote down, and we'd write it up on the board and we'd talk about it. And by the end, I did 200 different high schools, 20,000. So I have 20,000 filled out index cards in my attic. 10,000 of them have the exact same doodle on them, which is a handgun. So we made a word cloud after every time we'd update the word cloud. And so I always traveled with it in my suit pocket. And you know, those word clouds where the most frequent word is the biggest. So if you look at this word cloud, there are 3 enormous words on it. Number 1, guns. Number 2, racism. Number 3, police brutality. And this is 2013, 14, 15, 16. And of the many lessons, now we as diplomats are trained to talk about our support of Israel, Middle East peace, drones, South Sudan, Syrian civil war, climate change, international foreign policy. One of the many takeaways I learned was our domestic policy is foreign policy, whether we like it or not. That people are smart, they're paying attention, and they are confused and concerned. And yet we as diplomats aren't trained to talk about guns, racism, police brutality. Healthcare was number 4. But by dealing with these very difficult, complicated, nuanced, painful issues in a thoughtful way, I wasn't trying to win an argument with them. I wasn't trying to convince them that our gun laws are ones that they would want to adopt in their country. But just talking about it, dealing with the disagreement constructively, I think made a difference.
Well, you were really good at listening, and I know that whole exercise caught the attention of the education secretary in the State Department. So,
yeah,
all right, good. Yeah. No, go ahead. Comment, please.
No, so I basically learned that it's not a trick, but that sort of approach, I had learned it from President Obama, when he was a senator, watching him on the campaign, competing against Hillary Clinton and John Edwards in Iowa. And yes, he's a gifted speaker, right? Everyone got that memo. But what I thought was really interesting, and I saw this in Louisville when he came to town, was something he did that wasn't at all. He would sit there, ask a hard, open-ended question, listen to what people said, take notes, then respond to it from what was motivating him. This is when he was considering running for president, and do that. And it was really simple. And I reduced it to this little gimmick, which I'll try to show here, but it's the word also, spelled A-L, which is ask someone about their hopes and fears, listen and link it to your own hopes and fears, serve that overlap, and open up in the Brene Brown sense, or be vulnerable about what you know and what you don't know. And so that spells also. And I did that as a little reminder to myself and to the embassy team. I would contrast it with, I think, something that everyone on this call, all of us who came up in pyramid organizations, are really good at this other word that also spells also, but I do this one in all caps. We're all really good at arguing. We're all really good at lecturing. We're all really good at strategizing and organizing. And that's what the pyramid demands of us. And there's a time and a place for it. And the point I tried to do for myself and for my team was to say, we're already good at that. Let's also try to be good at asking, linking, serving, and opening up. And if you can do both, we can unlock a lot more energy and generate a lot more power.
Got one other item to ask you about, Matthew, before we turn to some audience questions. You're the 4th employee at CNET. It's 1993. You guys launched shareware.com. I remember that. And in 1998, you decided to spend $100 million on a marketing campaign, and you even sponsored Monday Night Football. And I do remember those ads. And you dropped a big old pyramid on your blooming constellation. So tell us about that experience and what happened.
Yeah, I didn't have the names for it back then, right? Because I just didn't. But I got to see, and I'm sure there are these wonderful moments in any organization when you just start to see, I always think of it as, well, now I think of it as a constellation, but it was just multiplying energy, right? In Mary Follett's sense, groups of people on our team, but really interesting in the case of Shareware and these other things we were doing, all these people who didn't work for CNET, volunteers would help us. We were one of the pioneers of what is now commonplace, which is user reviews, right? So we were trying to review a new laptop.
Right.
The traditional way is like get some expert to run all the tests on it. We did that. We didn't have many experts. We didn't have a lot of money, and our competitors had many more experts. So we decided, well, what if we just asked normal people who bought the IBM ThinkPad, just to date myself, what they think of it? They've owned the thing. Does the battery really last from San Francisco to Boston? They claim it does. You know what I mean? And so we just would ask people that. We'd listen and link back to what they told us, and we'd publish it. And it was really kind of simple, and it was magic, and it worked, and it was a good business model, and it grew. And then the hubris to, you know, as I say in the book, like we then killed that magic. And there was this one moment, I mean, the CNET continues to thrive, it just sold again. But anyway, we killed some of that early magic by our cockiness and our hubris. Summed up perfectly, we had to pick a tagline for this $100 million ad campaign. And it is the antithesis of what had made us successful. And we had them written on the sides of buses in New York and Boston, San Francisco, and Austin, Texas. And it said CNET, our little cool red logo. And then it said, friends don't let friends give tech advice. The entire magic of what we had built was friends giving friends tech advice. But we positioned ourselves as level 5, top of the pyramid types. You come to us for expert opinions and we will tell you you're welcome. You know what I mean? How cocky and awful and untrue. And that's what we so often do, to try to sort of consolidate power and look serious. And you wondered why we missed sort of what came, that is late 90s, like the whole social networks and friends letting friends, all that.
Sure. Yeah, good. We're rapidly running out of time. I wish we had some more, but I want to encourage people, check out the book, purchase it. The link is in the chat room. There's tons and tons of great stories and anecdotes, much like what you've heard Matthew talk about. So probably have time for just 2 questions, Matthew. We've got DEC member Rick from Columbus, Ohio, zooming in, and he sent a question in, really interesting. I've got a boss who's the definition of pyramid. How would I even begin to introduce the constellation mindset?
That is probably the question I have gotten most on my virtual book sessions. Here's what I would propose. Don't ask this boss to give away their power, because that won't work. And the reason it won't work is it's out of the gate, it's way too threatening, because we think about power as a scarce resource. So if I have 10 units and I have to share it with you, it means I have 5 and you have 5. Now, the great leaders in this book, Mary Follett, Jimmy Wales, D-Hawk, we didn't get to, the largest commercial organization in the history of the world is Visa, created by a guy you've probably never heard of named D-Hawk, who's amazing. He got Bank of America to give up power and let tiny little banks like he worked at participate in this system that became Visa on equal footing, with no greater shares, no greater power than these tiny little banks that they had formerly bossed around, which is a great story. Anyway, don't ask them to give away power because they think there's only so much. What you should do is show that you can do it alone. It's great if you could have one colleague join you in your next meeting. It's better with 2, but you can try it on your own, and have the courage to say 3 words out loud. I don't know. And then maybe follow with, maybe we might, ... And if you can show with that other person, or even by yourself, I don't know, but then frame the problem, get other people to jump in. And if you can start at your Monday morning meeting, so to speak, making things, small things, where your boss or you didn't come to that meeting with a fully fledged idea, but you could do that. That is so much more energizing to this boss, because I will guarantee you your boss is pretending, and they may fake it really well. They have no idea. And if COVID does nothing else, it should make us all really humble. Like every meeting about COVID should begin, I don't know, maybe we might, ... But anyway, if you start to do that, I think that pattern and tone that you can help set of co-creation, of making things together, will start to crowd out the pyramid tendencies, because they're not fun and they're debilitating. And just like the 9 out of 10 who, once that one person says playing, you'll realize, oh, okay, I'm not here to actually win this meeting. It's much more satisfying and productive. So that would be.
Yeah, that's great. I love maybe we might ... Thank you. Time for one last question. DEC member Bill asks, what good ideas about leadership have been sidetracked by the pandemic, and what good ideas regarding the constellation approach have emerged as a result of the pandemic?
I think here it is intentionally provocative to Bill's question. We, in institutions of any kind, will often, I was on one of the major airlines the other day, and this is such a cliche, we all say it, safety is job 1. And I would respectfully say, no, it isn't. Safety is at best job number 2. You trying to get people from A to B on an airplane is job 1, and you want to do that safely. Or in the context of schools, we're trying to educate the young as best we can and do so safely. We are trying to make cars that are safe. But I mean, the act of driving is inherently dangerous, right? And we try to do it, mitigate the danger and increase the safety. So this sort of, it is indicative when we say safety of number 1 is we are back where we began. We are pretending that we can eliminate uncertainty, and we're faking it. And it's not true, and it's not helpful. And so if we can bring humility combined with rigor, and the problem is, back to your other question, it's like we so often think that if we go outside the pyramid, it is chaos. It is not chaos. There is an order awaiting us of a different kind. It is the order of a constellation where you can be a star and you can connect to other stars and make things that are incredibly powerful. And it's open-ended and it changed. You have room for welcoming more stars in. And one of the benefits, just to close on Bill's question, and maybe a good way to sum up here on a Zoom, which is one of the blessings of all these Zoom meetings we've had to have is that no one can sit in the same seat every time. And that if you look in gallery view, regardless of rank, hierarchical rank, people are thrown together in new combinations, right? And so when we go back to the physical workplace, maybe we won't always have the boss sit at this table and the second highest ranking people. We won't recreate the pyramid around our round tables and really treat them like they ought to be as co-creation spaces. And then maybe as a final thought, because there's so many smart people on this call, Zoom has, I think, put out $100 million incentive for people to develop apps on top of Zoom so that it's a platform and not an app. That's their hope. I think in the spirit of Mary Parker Follett, someone should create an app which has another shape on, for every Zoom meeting you have, there's like a square that isn't Megan or Matt or Mary or Steve or, it is us together. And it tries to figure in every meeting to show and document what that group has made. I don't know how that would work. I have no idea how to do it myself, but I think that would be really cool and would be a wonderful way of showing and not telling the power of co-creation and the energy we can produce together if we're willing to say, I don't know, maybe we might, ...
That is a great way to sum up, folks. It's The Power of Giving Away Power. Fascinating read. And I promise you there's tons more thought leadership like the ones you just heard from Matthew. So Matthew, you're a fascinating guy. I can't thank you enough for spending time with the DEC. Good luck with the book. We wish you the best. Let us know if we can be helpful with something here in Detroit. And we hope the next time we do this with you, it can be in person.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'd love to be with you all in person. Steve, thank you and your team for inviting me in, and have a great session with Alec next session. He's wonderful. You're going to learn a lot with and from him.
Good. And good luck. Thank you. And good luck with Louisville.com too. It's interesting. I've been spending some time on it, and I know you and I talked about some really neat, unique ideas you've got going there. So
for next time.
Next time. It sounds great. Yeah.
Cheers. Thank you, guys.